Welcome back. It is the Erick Erickson Show across the nation. Hope you guys had a great weekend. The phone number, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, happy to have you. Let me reset now these three stories that have happened. They're all relatively breaking news items. I do want to get into the fall of Syria and how Iran gambled badly. All of it, actually the biggest story of the day. But we've got three pressing matters that have happened since the show started at the top of the hour. One, Daniel Penny's been found not guilty by the jury in New York. He is a free man. Number two, the U.S. Department of Justice has announced charges against 25 individuals, 19 of whom were arrested on Thursday. 14 of the 19 people are illegal immigrants. It's a massive fentanyl drug trafficking ring in the Northeast in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Boston is a sanctuary city. These people were all arrested in Boston, and it is a massive drug ring run 73% of the people involved, illegal aliens. The Department of Justice and the local news in Boston refusing to say that 13 of the 19 arrested were illegal aliens. Very notable that even the news media is just regurgitating DOJ talking points. Bill Malugin at Fox News was able to get the data from his sources. Last big story, a person of interest has been arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania for shooting Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO. The initial report from the New York Post that broke it was that he used an ID at McDonald's. That's not the case. The New York Times provides some clarity here. A customer at the McDonald's saw the guy and thought it might be him based on his appearance. Called the police. When the police got there, the person had a gun with a silencer and lots of fake IDs and other things. And one of the fake IDs, we're told from the press, matched the ID used by the gunman at the hostel in New York City. All that's happening right now. When we come back, we need to get into what's happening in Syria, the biggest story of the day. First, I need to tell you about Vision Computers. If you're looking at buying a computer for Christmas and you're worried about the transition to a new computer from an old computer, Vision can make it very easy for you. They will move all of your data over, your apps, your preferences, your documents. Everything gets moved to the new computer. And then you get their 5-star customer service, where if you ever have a question about your computer, ever have a problem, ever just you don't know what's going on, you can call a special number, and in 15 seconds or less, they'll give you the answer. They can even remote into your computer and fix it for you. They can do email and printer support. Call them at 404-COMPUTE or go to visioncomputers.com. Now, this is important if you're a business and you're at the end of the year and you want to make some purchases to offset tax liability. Vision is where you want to go to upgrade your technology. And again, every computer comes completely free, complimentary, their customer support. Or if you just want their customer support for your existing computer, it's just $179 a year. Call them at 404-COMPUTE. Tell them I sent you. You're going to save even more money. Visioncomputers.com or 404-COMPUTE. Any one of you, any business nationwide, 404-COMPUTE. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the phone, on the show, I am a professional, but I'm also like part Louisiana, part Swede, so sometimes the tongue gets in my way. I want to talk to you about Syria. Syria is actually a very big story. I want to set the scene for you here, for me on a personal level. So you understand, yeah, I do care about these international stories. I did grow up overseas. I do think it matters way more than oftentimes Americans talk. We want to obsess about elections and what's happening in Washington, and we live in a very integrated world that we lead. And so we should care about these stories. This one in particular, you've got to care about it, and I want to explain this to you because of the coming dynamics. Syria is a very big story. When I was a kid, I had a friend named Fez. Fez was from Syria. His father worked in finance, and they were Syrian refugees as well. They lived in the United Arab Emirates, where I grew up, and Fez's grandfather had slighted the Assad regime. To their family's telling of it, which always sounded a little bit preposterous, the grandfather, also in finance, had questioned funding for a relative of the Assad regime. Didn't want to make capital available. And he was disappeared to Sednaya. Sednaya opened in 1987. So I was in 8th or 9th grade when he came to school. Sednaya was the prison of the secret police of Syria. And the Assad regime at the time, Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, was the dictator of Syria. He was the leader of the Ba'athist Party, which is the Arab Nazi Party. And he rounded up this kid's grandfather and put him in a prison where tens of thousands of people died or were killed over time. At one point, 15,000 people were massacred in this prison. And I was taking a stage in Salt Lake City on Saturday night, giving a speech at the Utah chapter of Americans for Prosperity's annual event. And I saw that Sednaya had fallen. It had been captured by the rebels. And I knew the Assad regime had come to an end before reports even came out that he had fled the country and Damascus had fallen. Now we need to go into the Wayback Machine, because this one is really important for you to understand as a country. Syria was actually a pretty expansive land. And it was a territory of the Ottoman Empire. In 1945, the Syrian Republic was founded, the first Syrian Republic, and I am reading from Wikipedia. It was French territory. Britain had Jordan, France had Syria. You will notice, by the way, here's one of your historic anomalies to pay attention to. In the world today, after the collapse of the European powers and their empires, the territories that derive from the British Empire tend to be more stable than all the others. The Spanish, the French, the German, the Italians. The British tend to be the most stable because the British actually had for all the bashing of colonialism, the British actually had a colonial department that would go in and set up governments and integrate locals into that government. And over time, they became self-governing enterprises. Even in India, the British would come in, they established some colonial rule, but then they began integrating parliamentary democracy into the lifeblood of the people. So regardless of which continent you go to on planet Earth, the former possessions of the British Empire tend to be more stable than the possessions of the French or the Spanish or anyone else. When you look at the Middle East, Britain oversaw Jordan, France oversaw Syria, the Hashemite kingdom in Jordan. There was already leadership there. The British incorporated into their rule. The French decided to carve up Syria and its territory of Iraq, and they essentially put it in the hands of a minority party, the Alawite Party. It was a very small faction and ultimately resulted, after a series of disruption and party rule with the rise of the Ba'athist Party that had been allied with the Nazis, Hafez al-Assad took charge. He was a ruthless dictator. In 2011, the Arab Spring broke out of the Middle East. And what did Barack Obama do? Nothing. Nothing. Barack Obama misjudged the situation in the Middle East. Barack Obama and his team were sympathetic to Iran, and they wanted to rethink the Middle East. Now, there was this is part of what you don't appreciate if you're a Democrat. This is something you don't appreciate if you are in the media because your sympathies lie with the Democrats. There was a staggering level of arrogance. Now, I gotta listen. I need everybody's attention here, because those of you who are partisans who hate Barack Obama, you're going to be yes manning, amening this, but I need you to actually separate your partisan perspective on this for actual a real and I am being objective, and I'm not being partisan, and I need, if it's possible for you to do that, I need you to understand what I'm saying here from a nonpartisan perspective. There was a level of academic arrogance with Barack Obama's foreign policy team. And again, I don't mean that as in a partisan way. I mean it from this vantage point. They looked on a situation in the Middle East, and they really did think, we've been doing, and this is one of the things you hear all the time. We're doing it the same way, and we're getting the same results. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. If we want different results, which is peace in the Middle East, we should rethink how we do this. We've alienated Iran. Let's now bring Iran into the mix and see if we can get peace in a way no one else did. And we'll be the heroes, and we'll have earned the affirmative action Nobel Peace Prize Barack Obama got. It was affirmative action not because he was black, but because he hated George Bush and campaigned against him. And so they wanted to give the American president, who had done spectacularly nothing, the Nobel Peace Prize. And Barack Obama was ever in search of justifying what he knew was an unjustified award of the Nobel Peace Prize. And so they thought, let's rethink the Middle East and let's go with Iran. No one else is going with Iran. We'll go with Iran. And maybe in that way, we will be able to get peace in the Middle East. And that's what they did. And it was profoundly naive, but it was a naivete preceded by the arrogance of, we will rethink this in a way none of them ever thought of, and we'll get what they couldn't get. And the problem is everyone had thought of those things and rejected those things for precisely what we're seeing now. They emboldened Iran, which funded its terror allies, which funded the Assad regime and others to go after the entities that were trying to destabilize the Assad regime, and ultimately led to October 7th and the murder of over 1,200 Jews. That's what we got from Barack Obama. And sadly, the Biden regime is similar in arrogance of the thinking of Barack Obama, except they have one other thing, and that is Joe Biden, who has been profoundly wrong about everything in foreign policy for 50 years. One of the genius ideas that Joe Biden had about Iraq that he strongly advocated for was divided it into 3 regions. It may sound good to you until you understand one of the regions would have been a Kurdish region, and the Turks, who are supposedly our allies, despise the Kurds and wish to repress them. The Kurds hate the Turks, and the way Joe Biden wanted to divide Iraq would have led to perpetual war in the Middle East. And everyone understood this, including the Obama team, but Joe Biden was insistent on his beliefs, and he was wrong. So now we have the Ba'athist regime in Syria, the Arab Nazis, Civil war breaks out in 2011. Barack Obama plays his hand badly. He emboldens Iran, which props up Syria. The Russians have a naval base on the Mediterranean Sea in Syria. They come to the aid of the Assad regime. The whole thing begins to collapse over the last 2 weeks. It rapidly undid itself. What was the old Ernest Heming line in one of his books about how somebody went bankrupt slowly and then suddenly? Slowly and then all at once. The Assad regime is gone. Now, here's the good thing. The last of the Arab Nazi Party, the Ba'athist Party, the Iraq and Syrian Ba'athist parties are no more. It's good. The problem is Obama and Biden in particular, but to a degree Trump as well, had a very hard time navigating the different rebel factions in Syria. We have about 900 American troops there that have been allied with one of the factions. They happen to be a minority faction. The largest factions are tied to ISIS and Al Qaeda, but mostly to ISIS. They are terrorists who have taken over Syria. What we are going to get with the fall of Assad might actually be worse. I don't know. There are a lot of people who want to tell you confidently they know what's coming. I don't know. And I don't think anyone who will tell you confidently what's coming actually knows either. What is coming is going to be probably for a time more deeply destabilizing than the Assad regime, except for Israel. Israel has now, for the first time since the 1970s, since 1973, Israel has crossed into Syrian territory to build a buffer zone because the terrorists captured Damascus. And what did they say? They would march through Jerusalem to Mecca, meaning they want to expand the war in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia now has every reason to be allied with Israel. They trust Donald Trump in a way they don't trust Joe Biden. Donald Trump is coming back to power at the perfect time, put it to you that way. Bashar al-Assad is now in Moscow. There are two things I need you to take away from here real quick. This is very important. The Russians hedged their bets on the Assad regime, and they've now probably lost their only naval base on the Mediterranean Sea. They have lost a military alliance, and they blew a lot of money in Syria. Iran had a road from Tehran straight into Lebanon via Iraq and Syria. Iran no longer controls a trade route into Lebanon. All of this comes because of the October 7th attack. Iran gambled. They took a big risk. They trained Hamas, and now Hamas is gone, Hezbollah is gone, and Syria is gone. All three of these are the proxy armies that Iran used to fight Israel. Iran, in allowing, sanctioning, and training the October 7th attack, has now seen the collapse of all three of its proxies against Israel. Iran gambled badly, and so did Vladimir Putin. I cannot emphasize to you enough that Syria was a big regime ally to the Russians. They had a warm water port that could not be blocked by the Turks in Syria. That's now gone. This is a major realignment of the Middle East. I don't know how it's going to go. My suspicion is it's about to get even worse than it was for a time. The Americans have a chance to lead here and to structure some level of peace. And this is very important for all of you who are isolationists to understand. Either we will involve ourselves or the Chinese will involve themselves. And we will get nothing good out of this if China involves itself in this. Xi Jinping wants to be a power broker globally, not just in Asia. He wants to be involved in this. And I will tell you, we have the opportunity here because most of those involved are our allies right now, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And they're hoping and praying that Donald Trump will involve himself in some way that will lead to greater stability for them. When you have a group of terrorists who have taken over Syria saying they want to march through Jerusalem to Mecca, Saudi Arabia needs Donald Trump to be involved in this. The world needs American leadership in this. Doesn't mean we need to commit troops. It doesn't mean we need to police the world, but it does mean we need to have a concrete plan on what to do about the new leadership in Syria. It's going to matter greatly. What also matters greatly is the banks around the world that seem to be just discombobulated right now. And in this country, mortgage rates still very high. Swiss America has been the trusted leader in precious metals for 40 years, and they've been warning people about a secret war on cash for some time. If you're interested in safeguarding your hard-earned cash from the secret war, you need to listen. Got a free report to give you. They're rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau. Swiss America can educate you on protecting your assets in this report, The Secret War on Cash. It takes less than 15 minutes to read. It can save you on your retirement and finances. What you do to get a free copy is call or text my name, Eric, to 800-289-2646. The All-Out War on Cash includes digital forms of currency. It's growing. It's spreading. Get the Secret War on Cash report completely free for my listeners. Just mention Erick, E-R-I-C-K, when you call or text 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. The report is completely free. Just mention Erick, E-R-I-C-K, when you call or text 800-289-2646. Message and data rates may apply.
When the world seems crazy, he'll keep you sane. It's the Erick Erickson Show.
This hour of the program brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan. Wherever you are nationwide, First Liberty can help your business. If you're buying a building, building a building, growing your business, First Liberty would love to help you. You can reach out to them at firstlibertyga.com. Firstlibertyga.com. Let me go to the phones here. Eric in Edgewater, Florida, welcome to the show. How are you? Yes. Yeah, look, I'm glad you point that out. It is so transactional, it seems, when it comes to this administration and how they handle these things, and who they're upset about killing people. You know, Biden, I would be remiss. He did address the nation. It was kind of surprising.
What happened in the Middle East? After 13 years of civil war in Syria, and more than half a century of brutal authoritarian rule by Bashar Assad and his father before him, rebel forces have forced Assad to resign his office and flee the country. We're not sure where he is, but there's word that he's in Moscow. At long last, the Assad regime has fallen.
I mean, it was nice of him to address the nation about this, but he says he wants to send some money. Who are we sending money to? That's part of the problem here. Who are you sending money to in Syria right now? We do have a group of rebels that our special forces have been helping, and they're there on the ground, about 900 American servicemen. We've mostly been stopping them from being eliminated by the Russians. There's a major change in dynamic happening in Syria right now. Learning who the players are and who best to proceed is going to be complicated, but I frankly trust the team that Donald Trump's got around him with Marco Rubio and the like, and Mike Waltz. I do anybody, including Jake Sullivan, who you will recall a week before October 7th said the Middle East was the most peaceful it had been in a generation. These people don't need to be in charge, and they're about to be out of power. That's a good thing. Hello, America. Welcome back. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number, 877-973-7425. If you would like to be on the program, I would be very happy to have you. I got to read you this push alert from the New York Times. I saw it online. I didn't think it was true. I've got it on my phone here. A former Marine who choked a homeless man on a New York City subway train last year was found not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Really? Really? That's how you want to review it? Here's the Wall Street Journal. Former Marine Daniel Penny was found not guilty of homicide in the choking of a homeless man on a New York City subway. You mean he protected the people on the train from the crazy schizophrenic? Justice has been done in New York City, and it's a good thing Daniel Penny was found not guilty. The problem is every other potential good Samaritan is now going to be discouraged from saving people because they may get prosecuted. Pitiful. Now, I got to move on because we need to talk about the president. No, not that guy. Donald Trump. We need to talk about Donald Trump, not the existing president of the United States. It was wild to see the scene at Notre Dame this weekend. It was wild to see the Prince and Princess of Wales welcome Donald Trump to the British ambassador's house in Paris. It was wild to see Giorgia Meloni hanging out with Donald Trump, smiling and laughing as if he was in charge. It was wild to see Europe. And, you know, I should start with how the left is spinning this. The left is spinning this as, well, they all know that if you flatter Donald Trump, you can get your way with him. That's what was going on. No, what was going on was the European powers were treating Donald Trump as if he is acting president of the United States. Joe Biden is the incredible shrinking man. Jill Biden and Joe Biden were at Notre Dame. Or no. I guess Joe didn't go. Jill Biden was there, and Donald Trump was there. And the two of them seemed like they got along quite well. It is remarkable, though, that we are watching world leaders already acting as if Donald Trump is president of the United States. And I am a student of American history. I have paid attention to these things, and I do not recall this happening. Even when Barack Obama got elected, remember that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee gave him a Nobel Prize for doing nothing other than not being George W. Bush. I got in trouble at the time for saying it was affirmative action, but it really was. And people wanted to make it a racial thing, which, again, people say that there's no stigma attached to affirmative action. But when I said Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize as a case of affirmative action, people on the left went nuts, saying I was racist. I was like, wait a second, you were the guys who think affirmative action's great. But that wasn't what I was talking about. And they missed the point to attack me. And the point I was making at the time was that there had not been enough anti-America haters getting the Nobel Peace Prize, and so they had to give it to Barack Obama, who the only thing he had done was beat George W. Bush, a man they all hated. But even when Barack Obama beat George W. Bush, he may have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, but you didn't have European leaders treating him as if he was the president of the United States. You have European leaders treating Donald Trump as if he is the incumbent acting president of the United States. And oh my gosh, he is the acting president of the United States. Absolutely, for sure. Nobody cares what Joe Biden thinks anymore. No one's paying attention. And they're having an absolute meltdown over Donald Trump. The left is and the media is. So here's part of the problem. You need to understand. The left does control the American media, even as they don't think they do. There's a thing here. I have been reliably informed that I'm too far right wing for some radio stations. If you're a Trump supporter, you're laughing at that. Here's the thing, though. No progressive in America believes he's super progressive. They all believe they're moderates. And anyone to the right of them by even a millimeter is super right wing. No progressive believes they're progressive. They all think they're moderates. They all think they're centrists. Every progressive does. Members of the media who are super, super hyper progressive think that they're moderates. All the rest of us are just super right wing. I fell out laughing when I was told this. It was like, you should tell the Trump supporters, because I get told, I got a friend of mine who's a Trump supporter. He says, oh, you've got moderates. Like, there's literally nothing I've changed my mind on in the last 20 years in politics, and yet somehow I'm a moderate just because I don't care for Donald Trump. Even if I support him, I can give him money, I can vote for him, but nope, I got to be moderate because I'm not sufficiently Trumpy enough. It's wild to me. And I'm like, oh, you guys call yourselves conservatives. You're not a conservative. You support Trump. But on the left, they're like, oh, y'all are all violently right wing, militantly right wing. Okay. So I say that to say this. The left controls the media. They think they're all mushy moderates, and they think that the way for the media to cover Donald Trump is to be hysterical about everything he says. Donald Trump is Donnie from Queens. He says things like people on the internet say things. He doesn't necessarily mean them, but it gets the left riled up, and they think that the role of the press is to cover Donald Trump as insanely as they hear Donald Trump, not as you and I hear Donald Trump. I hear Donald Trump say some stuff that sometimes seems outlandish. I'm like, that's just the way he talks. He doesn't mean it. And so Kristen Welker on Meet the Press asked Donald Trump about prosecuting his political enemies.
No, I mean, he's going to do what he thinks is right.
Do you think that's right? Do you think that's right, sir?
If they think that somebody was dishonest or crooked or a corrupt politician, I think he probably has an obligation to do it. But
are you going to direct him to do it?
No, not at all.
So he's not going to direct Kash Patel to prosecute his enemies. And so what was the conversation over on MSNBC? They're having a normal one there about pardons.
There are a lot of positive reasons to be doing this kind of protective pardon, so that you actually are upholding the rule of law and you're not subjecting people who obeyed the rule of law to these kinds of threats, especially when one thing that is completely absent is any, as you said, Jen, any statement of fact about why these people would possibly be prosecuted. In other words, there's nothing which anyone has articulated as to what on God's green earth Dr. Fauci, a national hero, did other than save really, you could say, millions of lives across the.
All right, I can just have this here. These are progressives trying to justify their extreme position. Realize preemptive pardons are an extreme position, never been done before. And now they're like, it's perfectly fine. We should consider doing these sorts of things. Here's another.
There's a legal answer and then there's a pragmatic answer. The legal answer is it's absolutely okay. The Supreme Court in 1866 in the Garland case said that the president's pardon power is unlimited and that it extends to anything, including action pardons before legal proceedings are taken. So there's a clear precedent on that.
They're willfully trying to justify extreme, saying we're actually moderates and this is a moderate thing to do to stop Donald Trump. It's bizarre. And so what does Donald Trump actually want to do to people who didn't vote for him?
To treat you every bit as well as I have treated the greatest MAGA supporters. There's never been anything like MAGA in the history of this country. These people are so dedicated to making America great again. It's very simple. And I'm going to treat them just the same as I treat MAGA. We're going to treat everybody good. We want success for our country. We want safety for our country. You know, our country's under threat, as you know. We have a tremendous threat militarily because of the power of weapons and weaponry. It's a tremendous threat. Nobody talks about it, but it's a tremendous threat. I want to treat everybody the same. I want to treat them well.
I want to treat everybody the same. I want to treat them well. That's what he said. And the media is driven to hysterics by Donald Trump. And yet he's coming across statesmanlike. Again, on Jerome Powell, there's a massive movement among Donald Trump supporters to get him to fire Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve.
The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I don't know. I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, we don't.
Don't have plans to fire Jerome Powell. And what about NATO?
Sir, will the United States stay in NATO while you're in office?
In where?
NATO. Do you commit that the United States will remain a member of NATO while you're in office?
Again, they have to pay their bills. If they pay their bills, absolutely.
But not if they don't pay their bills.
But NATO's taking advantage of us because we were look, two things. Number one, they take advantage of us on trade, meaning the European nations, okay, like terrible. They don't take our cars. They don't take our food products. They don't take anything. They think it's a disgrace. And on top of that, we defend them. So it's a double whammy. So let me just tell you, I was able to get hundreds of billions of dollars put into NATO just by a tough attitude. I said to the countries, I'm not going to protect you unless you pay. And they started paying. And that amounted to more than $600 billion. That's a big thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be fighting. They wouldn't have any money to fight. If they're paying their bills, and if I think they're treating us fairly, the answer is absolutely, I'd stay with NATO.
Sounds like a reasonable position, does it not? As long as they foot their share that they say they're already going to pay, that they're not paying, we stay in NATO. Sounds a little more pragmatic than his prior position. But wait, there's one more that is driving the media absolutely insane with how reasonable Donald Trump comes off. Yes, reasonable Donald Trump.
The dreamers are going to come later. And we have to do something about the dreamers because these are people that have been brought here at a very young age. And many of these are middle-aged people now. They don't even speak the language of their country. And yes, we're going to do something about the dreamers.
What does that mean? What are you going to do?
I will work with the Democrats on a plan. And if we can come up with a plan, but the Democrats have made it very, very difficult to do anything. Republicans are very open to the dreamers. The dreamers, we're talking many years ago, they were brought into this country. Many years ago. Some of them are no longer young people. And in many cases, they become successful. They have great jobs. In some cases, they have small businesses. Some cases, they might have large businesses. And we're going to have to do something with them. And
you want them to be able to stay. That's what you're saying.
I do. I want to be able to work something out. And it should have been able to be worked out over the last 3 or 4 years. And it never got worked out. You know, Biden could have done it because he controlled, Congress to a certain extent, right? He could have done something, but they didn't do it. I never understood why, because they always seem to want to do it. But then when it comes down to it, they don't. I think we can work with the Democrats and work something out.
I think we can work with the Democrats to work something out. This sounds entirely reasonable. Here's the thing you all of you, whether you're a supporter of Donald Trump or not, need to understand. He's got nothing left to prove. He doesn't need to earn your vote. He can never run for office again. He doesn't need to earn it. He has beaten the Democrats. He's beaten the media. He's beaten the Republican Party into submission. He can be his own man now. Now, that can always be dangerous. It can be dangerous. Look at George W. Bush. When he got his second term, he was off the chain too. Tried to do Harriet Myers, tried to do amnesty, all that sort of stuff. Donald Trump wants a deal on the dreamers. Look, the kids who came here as like a 2-year-old illegally with their parents, they're now 20-something, 30-something years old. They got a small business. This is the only country they've ever known. I think it would be cruel to tell that person, you're not actually one of us, go home. I think it would. Sounds like Donald Trump agrees with me. But the person who's come here under Joe Biden, send them home. They've only been here for 4 years. Send them home. Make them come through a legal pathway. We should be able to nuance between the people who've been here 20, 30 years, done nothing wrong, their parents brought them over here when they were little, versus the person who's come in the last 4 years. And we should start with the criminals. Start with the criminals. Start with the gangs. Start with all those people. Start with people who've already been ordered to deport and haven't, and we can have a conversation. But we shouldn't be scared by this. This is a reasonable Donald Trump, and the left thinks that everyone should be driven to hysteria by him. He's going to be president of the United States. The Europeans are already treating him like it. Americans might as well start paying attention and not be fearful by what he says. Everything he said should be viewed pretty reasonably.
You can follow Erick around on social media at EW Erickson on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And check him out at EWErickson.com.
Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. There are a couple of things that are happening right now. Let me bring you up to speed. This is from CNN. Quote, the man who is being held in Pennsylvania in connection to the United Healthcare CEO killing was in possession of a 2-page document railing against the healthcare industry, suggesting violence is the answer, according to a police official who has seen the document. Now, maybe, just maybe, this guy wasn't the killer and was just applying for the job of president of an Ivy League institution. If so, he'll have some anti-Semitic literature as well. But that tracks for being the president of an Ivy League institution as much as it tracks for being a madman. The other thing that you need to know is there's a lot of question as to how could the jury in the Daniel Penny case have been divided over whether he was guilty of manslaughter, but then very united very quickly that he was not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Having served on a jury and also been a criminal defense attorney and worked for a district attorney, let me just say this. One, juries are unpredictable, but also when prosecutors maneuver like that to drop a serious charge in favor of a lesser charge, a lot of the jurors will rapidly conclude they didn't mean it. And I'm not surprised that the jury wound up rapidly concluding he was not guilty if the prosecutor was so eager to drop the negligence charge or the manslaughter charge in favor of criminal negligence. Doesn't surprise me at all that a jury would come to the conclusion the prosecutor never meant it and dispatch the case. Now, I got to tell you about the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. You can get 3 of them for less than $200 and save $200 at EdenPureDeals.com. What you do is go to EdenPureDeals.com. You'll see a discount code box right on the front page of that website. So go to EdenPureDeals.com and put in Erick3 in your discount code box. ERICK, the number 3, Erick3. What is the Eden Pure Thunderstorm? Well, it is an air purifier. It gets rid of pet dander, pollen, dust, the like. But also, it's an odor eliminator. It wipes out odors. It generates ozone that is attracted to the ions of odor particles, locks onto them, and neutralizes them. And the new Eden Pure Thunderstorm also gets rid of bacteria and viruses, 99.9% of bacteria and viruses. It also generates plasma. And as the bacteria and viruses flow through the thunderstorm, they are destroyed. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is Erick3. Get 3 of them, save $200. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code Erick3, ERICK3. Hello and welcome back. It's Erick Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, you're more than welcome to. We got a lot of stuff happening today. I want to, Randall emailed me. There was some confusion about the jury before I get into the NDAA stuff with Speaker Johnson that I wanted to talk about. Let me explain this one again. Let me read you. This is the verdict sheet in the Daniel Penny case. A lot of people are wondering, how could the jury so quickly dismiss on the second charge when it took them so long and they were so divided over the first charge? This is manslaughter in the second degree. This is the charge. There's a bunch of legalese here, but I was actually a criminal defense attorney. In addition to having worked for a time in a prosecutor's office, been a lawyer. Let me read you this. This is manslaughter in the second degree. If you find the defendant guilty of count one, manslaughter in the second degree, then do not consider and do not render a verdict on count two, criminally negligent homicide. If you find the defendant guilty of count one, manslaughter in the second degree, for the reason that the people have failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was not justified, then you must not consider count two, criminally negligent homicide, and you must also find the defendant not guilty of that count. If you find the defendant not guilty of count one, manslaughter in the second degree, for some reason other than lack of justification, then proceed to consider and render a verdict on count two, criminally negligent homicide. So what does all this mean? In New York and many states, you can file multiple criminal charges against a defendant. You can file greater and lesser charges. In this case, they had the strong charge of manslaughter in the second degree. Manslaughter in the second degree, you got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was not justified in his actions. If you don't do that, then if you find for some reason other than lack of justification, you can go to count two. Now, I don't have all of the jury instructions in front of me, but essentially the instructions are saying if you find him guilty of manslaughter in the second degree, ignore all the other lesser charges. That's it. If you don't find him guilty of manslaughter in the second degree, you have two paths. If you find him not guilty of manslaughter in the second degree for the reason the people failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was not justified, you can't consider count two, criminal and negligent homicide. However, if you find the defendant not guilty of manslaughter in the second degree for a reason other than lack of justification, go to count two. None of that matters at this point. Some of the speculation was, well, they found him not guilty on count two because they dismissed count one. That's not true at all. That's a misreading of the situation. And to the extent that anyone wrote anything about it, that muddied the water here. And I don't want to muddy the water, and I feel like maybe I am. Well, let me just clarify this one for you. First of all, the pieces that are circulating out there are very poorly written by people who aren't lawyers. The judge tossed the manslaughter in the second degree charge, so it's as if it never existed. And because it's as if it never existed, the instructions related to manslaughter in the second degree never existed with the jury. Essentially, the jury went back and they had to convince themselves, well, he's not charged with manslaughter in the second degree, so we're to consider criminally negligent homicide. The bottom line is this. When a jury sits for a trial and they are trying someone for manslaughter in the second degree, and then suddenly the judge and the prosecutor say, oh, our bad, pretend he was never charged with manslaughter in the second degree. You have a jury. Now, this was a divided jury on whether or not he was guilty of manslaughter. When the judge and the prosecutor called the jury in who's divided over whether or not he's guilty of manslaughter and say, our bad, pretend he was never even charged with that, go see if he's criminally negligent. Those jurors who were holdouts thinking this is serious are now going to go back into a jury room with a bunch of people who were insistent he was not guilty of manslaughter, and you're going to hear them make the argument like, guys, We told y'all he wasn't guilty of manslaughter, and now they want you to pretend he was never charged with manslaughter, just criminally negligent homicide. If they aren't that concerned about the case, maybe you shouldn't be either. And so you have a jury where at least one, but probably several, there were jurors who were wearing masks the whole time. I bet you they were the ones who wanted to find him guilty. Just speculation on my part, but come on, you know the type. They're insistent we got to do something. This guy died. There's got to be justice. A man has died. Daniel Penny took his life. There's got to be justice. And they go back into court. They say, look, we're divided. Some of us don't think he's guilty. Some of us do. We can't come to unanimity here, which is required under the law. And the judge's like, hey, guys, just pretend we never even charged you with manslaughter. Just go look at criminally negligent homicide. Those holdouts are going to be like, clearly they don't care. Clearly this is for show, so not guilty. They wasted our time. I'm interested to hear the jury interviews. I really am interested in hearing the jury interviews on this one. But that's what happens when a prosecutor demands manslaughter of the second degree and then says, our bad, let's just go with criminally negligent homicide if y'all can't agree. The jury's going to be like, you guys have wasted our time. This guy's not guilty. We want to go home. That's the situation. Daniel Penny's been acquitted, and it's a very good thing. So now, we need to move to the Speaker of the House. The NDAA is the Defense Authorization Bill, the National Defense Authorization Act. It is the appropriations for the United States Armed Services. And the NDAA is actually a very big piece of legislation funding our military. Here's the way the NDAA works. The House and the Senate make their appropriations. They do behind-the-scenes negotiations to get both sides to agree to certain positions on the NDAA. And both sides have things they want to get into the NDAA. Both sides have things they want to leave out of the NDAA. Well, I got to say, one of the things that has happened that is upsetting is Hakeem Jeffries excised the China outbound investment provision. Everybody cleared that provision. The Speaker approved of it. Senate Republicans approved of it. Senate Democrats approved of it. The White House approved of it. At the very last hour, before finalizing the text of the NDAA, Hakeem Jeffries said no. Now, I'm going to read you this tweet from Michael Soblink. There's something like 8 rounds of edits on this provision, the China outbound investment provision. Hakeem Jeffries never raised any concerns or proposed any edits. They never objected to it. They never flagged it. And then just before midnight, he killed it. No one in the government expected this. Chuck Schumer's team thought it was a lock and told others as much. Supporters in the executive branch were congratulating each other for this position that blocks Chinese investment. The National Security Council of a Democratic administration does not understand what the leader of the Democrats in the House just did or why he did it. House Republicans think it's a personal attack on Speaker Johnson. Sounds like House Republicans are going to try to get it in the continuing resolution. So what does this actually do? This prohibits investment with the Chinese Communist Party. The China Outbound Investment Act also prohibits American citizens from investing with the Chinese Communist Party inside the United States. It's a pretty big deal. The Chinese Investment Act, let me just read you this from Michael Soblink at the Washington Examiner. The U.S. Congress intends to pass this piece of legislation. American companies and venture capital firms have enriched Chinese companies with direct ties to the People's Liberation Army. The evidence of U.S. complicity in problematic PRC industries is overwhelming. So the House and the Senate agreed that U.S. companies should be prohibited from investing with People's Republic of China entities that are involved in the persecution of the Uyghurs. Venture capital investments with the People's Liberation Army have exceeded $140 million in the last year, including the development of nuclear weapons. So American venture capital firms would be prohibited from investing in People's Liberation Army companies that are developing weapons technologies for China. Everyone agreed to this legislation. At the very end, Hakeem Jeffries killed it. Why did Hakeem Jeffries kill it? Well, there's the speculation it's punishment to Speaker Johnson for getting something into the NDAA. What Speaker Johnson got into the NDAA was a provision that will prohibit the government from paying for the gender transition surgeries of people in the military and their children. There are some members of the military who want their children's gender transitions covered on American taxpayer dollars. Now, remember, there are some members of the House Republican Conference who have been attacking Mike Jeffries as not one of their own. Or Mike Johnson. They've been attacking Mike Johnson as not one of their own. Mike Johnson is a social conservative. Mike Johnson got a start in Louisiana politics arguing against the divorce laws in Louisiana, saying it was too easy to get a divorce in Louisiana. He's a big pro-life activist. Mike Johnson has always been a conservative, always been a social conservative. And Mike Johnson was able to, at the very last minute, thread the needle and get language into the NDAA that prohibits federal taxpayer dollars from being used to fund the gender transitions, particularly of minors. Federal government will not be able to use its money to pay for these things related to national defense. Hakeem Jeffries was too late. He couldn't take it out. So he decided to get rid of the China funding measure in response. The China funding measure will come back into the continuing resolution now. It can be put in there. The gender transition issue could not under the rules of getting the continuing resolution through. It's a big win for social conservatives, and the setback on China can be undone. It's notable how the Democrats decided to try to sabotage the measure at the end was going after military investments with China. It's a big win for conservatives. And also, here's the thing. Essentially, the government last week before the United States Supreme Court in Scrimity argued for government support of transitioning children. Mike Johnson, by blocking this measure, sets the stage now for the Trump administration on January 20th, while their Supreme Court is still drafting Scrimity, to send a note to the Supreme Court and say, hey, don't know if you noticed this, but the Republicans and Democrats in the United States Congress have agreed the government should not fund gender transitions for minors. This is a major change from the position argued by the Biden administration before the court, and you should take this into consideration when you're shaping your opinion in Scrimity. It's a big double whammy against the trans activists, what Mike Johnson was able to pull off. It's a huge win in that issue. Nobody seems to be paying attention to it, that he was able to get it through. And at the very last minute, he was able to get it through, and it's going to become federal law, and Joe Biden's going to sign it into law, and it completely upends Joe Biden's position on trans activist issues. It was a great play by Mike Johnson. He deserves a lot of credit. Now, I got to tell you about Old Glory Bank. It is my bank. It is a wonderful bank. I love Old Glory Bank, and you will love Old Glory Bank. And the way you can get Old Glory Bank is by going to oldglorybank.com. Look, y'all, let me just put it to you this way. Individual or business, Old Glory Bank was started by conservatives. Because of the debanking trends, conservatives are having their accounts closed by major banking institutions in this country. It's happened to Melania Trump. Her bank account was closed by a bank in New York. They didn't want to do business with the Trumps. Old Glory Bank, you're never going to have to worry about that. It was by conservatives for conservatives. It's a great bank, headquartered out of Oklahoma. They'd love to have your business. If you're a business and you're conservative, go to Old Glory Bank. It's worth moving your business to them. oldglorybank.com, member FDIC, equal housing lender. They can do home loans. They can do car loans. They can do business loans. I've referred now a half dozen businesses to Old Glory Bank. Every single one of these businesses told me they were skeptical of doing business with an online bank. Every single one of these businesses moved to Old Glory Bank. Two of these businesses needed loans. They were impressed with Old Glory Bank. Why? Because Old Glory Bank sent human beings to these businesses to sit down with the businesses, learn their business, understand what the business did, and they got loans approved. Their local banks knew less and had less of a relationship with them than the online bank they were using. That's what sets Old Glory Bank apart. They would love to have you and your business. I have my checking account and my savings account with them. OldGloryBank.com. You can do it all there online. Takes less than 8 minutes. OldGloryBank.com. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply.
Well connected and well respected. It's Erick
Welcome back. Tune in, if you will, please. At the top of the next hour, I will bring you the latest. We're starting to learn details about this individual who has been detained in Pennsylvania at a McDonald's from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and it sounds like this individual is a anti-capitalist climate change activist. I've been warning for a while these people were starting to turn violent, and this may be an example of that. So stay tuned for those details. But I listen. I gotta apologize um, in advance to everybody for saying what I'm about to say. Those of you in the metro Atlanta area will be okay with it. I need someone to get Arthur Blank's attention. Arthur Blank, one of the founders of Home Depot. Sir, at your advanced age, God bless you for all you've done. Whether we agree in politics or not, you're a great guy. But please, for the love of all that is good and holy on planet Earth, please either fix the Falcons or sell the Falcons. What you people did during the draft was absurd. You got all these quarterbacks, and none of them can perform. Kirk Cousins is a wonderful person. He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass since week 9 and has had 9 interceptions. Kyle Pitts is a bust. Terry Fontenot, the worst general manager, it seems, in football. Your organization is profoundly broken, sir. Please fix the Falcons or sell the Falcons so someone can fix them. You seem united or distracted by Atlanta United. Please deal with the Falcons, sir. Please. Now, I got to tell you about Omaha Steaks because, well, this is a great place for you guys for the holiday to get some impressive gifts for family, for friends, for business colleagues, whatever you need. omahasteaks.com. Go to omahasteaks.com. You can get some of their very premium dry aged beef, but all their steaks are aged. You can get their New York strips, their bacon wrap fillets, which are fantastic. Get the desserts, the caramel apple tartlets my wife loves. At checkout, promo code Erick, ERICK, saves you an extra $30, minimum order required. If you're overwhelmed by the site, because there's a lot, and by the way, it's all 50% off right now. If you're overwhelmed by how much there is, you can put Erick in the search bar and see a curated selection of great steaks, of gourmet jumbo franks, of burgers, desserts. But y'all, everything is site wide, 50% off. You can get seafood, shellfish, you can get fish, you can get pork and poultry, you can get their great steaks, get desserts, ready-made sides, desserts, main courses, all of it available at omahasteaks.com, and all of it 50% off right now for a limited time. And then at checkout, use promo code Erick, ERICK, get an extra $30 off at omahasteaks.com. Check them out today. Great for the holidays. Hello, America. Welcome. It's Erick Erickson here across the United States. Glad to have you with me. The phone number, if you want to be on the program today, 877-973-7425. As always, you can text Erick, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777. Should you wish to be on the program, I would be happy to have you. We got a lot of moving pieces happening right now on the program. I want to make sure that I bring you up to speed on everything, and we should begin now. We have the name of the individual identified by police as a person of interest in the shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO. His name is Luigi. Wonder if his brother's Mario. Luigi was at McDonald's apparently jumping up and down trying to jump over mushrooms on the floor. Luigi Mangione from Townsend, Maryland, 26 years old. He's been taken into custody at the Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's. Apparently says he lived in Hawaii as a tech bro, graduated or was at the University of Pennsylvania, and according to sources with police, had a manifesto railing against the U.S. healthcare industry and in support of climate change. He is a self-described anti-capitalist, of course. Friends, I want to go back to something I wrote in November of 2021. Nicole Hannah-Jones is a Pulitzer Prize winner. She came up with the 1619 Project for the New York Times, and she said, this is her quote. It's a direct quote from her. Destroying property which can be replaced is not violence. They were beginning at the time to justify violence by doing what the left always does, changing words by saying it's not violence. Violence is not violence. If something can be replaced, it's not violence. Killing someone is violence until that person can be replaced, and then it's not violence. You see, this is where we're headed. I have regularly condemned the actions of individuals on January 6, 2021 for being violent, and there have been those on the right who insisted there was no violence. But what I find is the mirror image on the left where you see cities in this country burning down and property destruction, and they say it's not really violence. I mean, according to Nicole Hannah-Jones, January 6th could not have been violent because destroying property which can be replaced is not violent. It's not violence. See these twisting of justifications there. You can't say, if you believe that destroying property is not violence, well, January 6th was not violent. On November 17th, 2021, Jonah Goldberg at the Dispatch wrote this. You need to pay attention to this quote. There were the days when the militant left wasn't dedicated merely to blowing up binary gender categories with tweeted truth bombs, but to blowing up buildings and occasionally people with real bombs. During the summer of 1970 alone, there were 20 bombings a week in California. Quote, it's a wonderful feeling to hit a pig. It must be a really wonderful feeling to kill a pig or blow up a building, said Mark Rudd of the Weather Underground. Jane Fonda held F the Army rallies in 1972, let herself be used as an enemy or a propaganda tool for the North Vietnamese, even posing behind the trigger of a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. The Black Panthers made Black Lives Matter look like a debating society. As bad as the BLM and Antifa riots of 2020 were, and they were bad, they pale in comparison to riots in the past. In 1971, the Weather Underground bombed the United States Capitol. In 1972, the Weather Underground bombed the Pentagon. In 1975, the Weather Underground bombed the State Department. They plotted the assassination of a California state senator in 1978. That's only one violent left-wing group. There are others. In the last few decades, the Earth Liberation Front has engaged in numerous terrorist acts in the nation. They have burned down research facilities and destroyed violence, Ted Kaczynski was a lunatic radical of the left, the Unabomber. According to a 2001 report, quote, left-wing extremism is responsible for 3/4 of designated acts of terrorism in the United States in the 1980s. By the way, they also have something else in common. Left-wing terrorists tend to be younger and better educated than right-wing extremists, and they tend to live in urban areas, making high population centers target-rich. The source for that is the paper with the Office of Scientific and Technical Information of the United States government. Left-wing extremism often has developed from working class movements seeking in theory to eliminate, not preserve, class distinctions. Communism evolved from left-wing extremism. The threat from left-wing extremism did not die with the threat of the Soviet Union, however. Domestic groups and state-sponsored cells and individuals have continued their espionage activities and planning of terrorist actions in the United States. Leftist extremists were responsible for 3/4 of officially designated terrorist acts in the 1980s. From an international perspective, of the 13,858 people who died between 1988 and 1998 in acts committed by the 10 most active terrorist groups in the world, 74% were killed by leftist organizations. Although the current domestic terror threat within the United States is focused on right-wing extremists and white supremacists, left-wing extremists are alive and well and have several objectives. Some of these groups want to replace the government with a Marxist-Leninist system. Others want to carve out a new nation in the southeast United States where the national territory of Kush would be established. Some of the leaders of these movements are political exiles in Cuba. Many of them are in the United States as well. Left-wing extremists pose an espionage threat to the United States as well. And again, they tend to be more educated and wealthier than their right-wing counterparts. This, by the way, was prepared for the United States Department of Energy Office of Safeguards and Security in Washington, D.C. in April of 2001, before the September 11th attacks. Luigi Mangione appears to fit the bill. He graduated as valedictorian from a prep school with a $40,000 a year tuition. He hated the medical community because of his complaints, he said, of what they did to family members. His LinkedIn page says he once worked in an assisted living facility for the elderly. Mangione's account on Goodreads shows quotes he particularly liked, ranging from Socrates to Bruce Lee to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Imagine a society that subjects people to conditions that make them terribly unhappy, then gives them the drugs to take away their unhappiness, Kaczynski wrote. Science fiction is already happening to some extent in our own society. Instead of removing the conditions that make people depressed, modern societies give them antidepressant drugs. In effect, antidepressants are a means of modifying an individual's internal state in such a way as to enable him to tolerate social conditions he would otherwise find intolerable. He was a valedictorian in 2016 from his high school where he played soccer. Tuition was $40,000 a year. Then he went to the University of Pennsylvania to study computer science and cognitive science. He worked for a tech company in California, but said he lived in Honolulu, Hawaii. He was a data engineer. Y'all, I've been telling you for quite a while that progressives are turning violent again. There's always been a strange strain of violence. And what's happened now, notably, is in the last few years, you've had a lot of people with online energy rationalizing the violence against Brian Thompson. People hate insurance companies. This is a natural impact of it. This is natural flow of it. No, there's nothing natural about taking a human life. If there is something natural about it, then we should not have laws against murder because it's natural. But it's not just this guy. And again, alleged suspect now. The home of the University of Michigan Regent Jordan Acker has been vandalized in Huntington Woods, Michigan. The attack involved the throwing of mason jars through windows and spray painting the family SUV with pro-Palestine messages. This is the third attack against this man since October 7th. He is Jewish. He has faced harassment linked to his public role on the University of Michigan's Board of Regents. Democrats aren't being very loud about this. But wait, there is more. George Mason University Students for Justice in Palestine co-president has been looked at. Court documents, which do not publicly indicate a reason for a search of this person's home, allege that authorities found guns and magazines inside the home. Materials authorities say belong to the father and brother of the George Mason students. Note to those of you in Rio Linda, the magazines are gun magazines, not like printed pages. Police allege that Hamas and Hezbollah flags were found, according to an emergency petition filed to temporarily prohibit the men from possessing or buying firearms. Prosecutors later said during a hearing authorities found 4 weapons unsecured in the home, along with more than 20 magazines with 30 bullets each. According to Laura Birnbaum, a spokesman for Fairfax County Commonwealth's attorney, also found were arm patches with Arabic text that was translated in court to read, "Kill them where they stand," and other patches that call for the death of Jews and America. Prosecutors argued that the high volume of weapons and ammunition, along with specific threats, pose a reasonable danger to others. So you've got Luigi Mangione, who is now supposedly alleged to be the shooter of Brian Thompson. The left has justified killing insurance company executives. He apparently is a climate change nut and also hates capitalism. You have the left-wing Students for Justice in Palestine stockpiling ammo, has an arm patches with Arabic writing that says "Kill them where they stand," who wants to eliminate Jews and the United States. The University of Michigan, you have an anti-Semitic attack on the regent of the University of Michigan. You have the New York Times singing the praises of a book about blowing up oil and gas pipelines in this country. The left is turning violent. They've lost the election. And in losing the election, they're not having a normal one. For the last 4 years, Democrats and members of the press have been warning about the rise of right-wing terrorism in this country. Yet, Floyd Lee Corkins, who shot up the Family Research Center, was a progressive activist. James Hodgkinson was a progressive Rachel Maddow viewer who wanted to assassinate Republican members of Congress. 2 separate individuals wanted to assassinate Donald Trump, one of whom got a shot off. We've had multiple progressive anti-Semitic protesters on college campuses around this country. Now you've got this guy who murdered a husband and father of 2 because he's outraged at insurance companies. They're all people on the left, and the left keeps finding ways to excuse the violence and explain and rationalize the violence. And you will notice that when this happens, it happens to be, God forbid, someone from the right, people on the right stand up and say, this is not acceptable. And on the left, they stand up and say, this isn't acceptable, but it's always the but that fires the bullets.
When the world seems crazy, he'll keep you sane. It's the Erick Erickson Show.
If you're just tuning in here across America, the name of the suspect is Luigi Mangione. Yeah, boy, the internet is having a field day with this, I will tell you. It appears this guy, though, is very much on the left, an anti-capitalist, environmentalist who hates insurance companies and believes that they are quote unquote parasites. Now, here's the thing, this is very simple point that needs to be made. People on the left have been justifying the murder of this father and husband because he worked for a company they view as bad, and therefore he was bad. And when you begin to do that, you begin to otherize. And I want you to consider how many people were upset when Donald Trump used words like parasite to talk about illegal aliens. And none of those people are going to be upset that this guy used that word to talk about an insurance company CEO and people in insurance. It is historically a pattern on the left that they otherize people and exterminate people. Mao, Pol Pot, Lenin, Stalin. They can say that Hitler was right wing, but Hitler was actually a national socialist who wanted universal health care and imposed vegetarianism on the Nazi people, very much in line with the left. The left, its eschatology is we have nowhere else to go, and anyone who's ruining this world is bringing hell to earth, and they must be eliminated. And when you have that ideology, when you have that eschatology, it leads to violence. And this is what's happening here. It is absolutely wild to see the justifications for violence happening. And yet they are, and they'll find excuses for this guy. The moral thinking at Hillsdale College would never have people who go off the deep end like this. They are set apart. They are a unique institution and have been since 1844, where they're educating, not indoctrinating, and they teach people to be proudly Americans because of what set apart and made distinct the United States of America. All you have to do is go to erickforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, erickforhillsdale.com. Go sign up with Hillsdale College today. You can get Imprimis. You can get their podcast network. You can get many free courses. Hillsdale College, again, is a great institution that has been setting itself apart from others in this country for quite a while. I really hope you'll go to erickforhillsdale.com today. Check them out, erickforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K. Sign up for Imprimis at least. I actually got my latest copy. The feature piece is from Kevin Roberts of Heritage Foundation. Imprimis comes to your mailbox free of charge. erickforhillsdale.com. Go sign up with them today. If you want to be on the program, delighted to have you. I will tell you that in looking into this Joey Mangione guy, his views are complex. He has tweeted a bunch of stuff about being anti-woke. He's tweeted a bunch, or he has written a bunch of stuff about hating capitalism. Do we describe him as Bernie bro or something? He's crazy murderer. How about that? You know, here's one of the problems with the age we live in. So much of our society now is programmed to go for deeper context. So this guy, according to the reports of his manifesto stuff, he was anti-capitalist, he was environmentalist, but he hated the wokes. Everybody wants to pigeonhole him now, left wing, right wing. He definitely appears to lean left in his socioeconomic views, but he doesn't like the wokes. So the progressives will say, well, if he doesn't like the wokes, he must be right oriented. He's in tech. But who is this guy? Allegedly, he murdered a husband and father and was able to rationalize in his head that the man was a parasite. The larger issue here is this, is that there are people who will otherize those they disagree with. And in so doing, they can view people in such a way as to think they're not really human. They're not really us. That's a dangerous thing. I need you to follow along with me in something, and this is somewhat repetitious, because I know I have said this multiple times, but I really need to say it again. But before I do, I just want to read for you a little bit of Charles Cook at National Review. This is from Charles Cook, posted right when the show went live at noon today. The murder of Brian Thompson, the late CEO of United Healthcare, has been met in certain quarters with two disgraceful responses, one explicitly grotesque, the other implicitly so. The explicitly grotesque response has been to openly cheer Thompson's death on the grounds that he deserved to die. This reaction has come largely from figures on social media who believe themselves to be proto-revolutionaries. The implicitly grotesque response has been to declare that one is against assassination, but that one comprehends it and perhaps even sympathizes with it nonetheless. This reaction has been more broadly on display than the other, having appeared in established outlets such as CNN, CBS, and the New York Times, as well as in the Twitter feeds of academics at Columbia and elsewhere. Within the mainstream press, only the Washington Post has found the decency to condemn the killing without reservation. There is no justification, the paper's editorial board submitted this week, for taking a life in this manner. So obvious ought the presumption to be that one should feel dirty for developing the thought any further. To ask why a human being was murdered in cold blood is to imply that there exists a sufficient reason for the act. There does not, and I have no interest in negotiating with those who disagree. What I will do, however, is attempt to convey to those figures exactly why their reactions are so iniquitous and so misplaced, and indeed why condemnation of it is the prerequisite to a functioning civil society. The Post concludes its excellent rejoinder by observing, quote, "This violent attack on one man is really an attack on society itself." That is correct. Why? Well, because everyone has grievances, and there is nothing within our social compact that permits a small subset of them to exempt themselves from its elementary standards. In other countries, where some or all of the medical system has been socialized, it is politicians rather than private insurers who deny or delay or ration health care. Were Americans to adopt such a system, there would remain many Brian Thompsons, but instead of being called CEO, they would be called Senator, Representative, Director of Health and Human Services, or the like. To establish the principle that one may take revenge against anyone who is obliged to deal with scarcity would be to greenlight the routine assassination of the elected or appointed officials who would take responsibility in an altered status quo. Is that what we want? Those who have committed themselves to the maximalist defense of Thompson's killing would presumably either respond yes to the inquiry or make some specious distinction based on their misunderstanding of the profit margin. The weaker apologists, by contrast, will shrink back into their chairs, but they too ought to engage in some self-reflection, for it seems extremely obvious that, were the circumstances different, they would not have got as close as they did to making excuses for the worst of all crimes. The New York Times, in particular, has been keen to inform its readers about the hate, anger, frustration, and rage against health insurance providers that supposedly exists abroad in the land. If pushed to explain this tack, its editors would likely claim that the paper is merely stating a fact. But surely one cannot imagine that this approach would have been taken if Brian Thompson had been the CEO of, say, ABC News. Well, unlike with health insurance, it is an indisputable fact that a supermajority of Americans hate the legacy media and that a minority of Americans express anger, frustration, and rage towards it. Do we really think that following the killing of a prominent media executives, the New York Times would have commissioned a series of indulgent pieces pointing to the legitimate feelings that culminated in an illegitimate act? Or do we think that in such circumstance, the Times would have recognized the evil inherent in adopting the perspective and instead reminded their readers that even the most disdained human beings do not deserve to be killed? That's Charles Cook at National Review. Here's my point. In the history of mankind, the progressive vision of heaven and hell is on earth because there is no heaven and there is no hell. They're atheist in their thinking. So we ourselves, human beings, make heaven or hell. And the pattern on the left and left-wing thinking is this. People get otherized. If you are an environmentalist and you wish to bring heaven to earth, the person who drives the SUV is bringing hell to earth. And you must either structure a system of government in which they are deprived of the ability to purchase an SUV, or you must eliminate them from the gene pool. If you are a communist who believes that the capitalists are bad and the capitalists keep finding ways to make money, you must either eradicate capitalism or eradicate the people who keep making the money. You label them bourgeois and tell people they are bad. Society turns against them and they are shut down, eliminated, and oftentimes murdered. The sort of thinking that apprise collectivist frames, we are all parts of groups, we are all parts of categories, we are not individuals created in the image of God. It's creeping on the right too. You're having it happen to people on the right, the woke right. There are progressives on the left and progressives on the right. We might as well be mindful of it. It's dangerous. Whether you like insurance companies or not, Brian Thompson was a human being made in the image of God. He had a wife and he had 2 sons. And he's murdered by someone who decided that Brian Thompson was not a man, not a father, not a husband, but a parasite. We've just gone through an election cycle where the very same voices finding ways to excuse the murderer of Brian Thompson were outraged by Donald Trump using phrases they said harkened back to Nazi Germany when he talked about immigrants and immigration. Now they're trying to find excuses. I got to tell you, right and wrong cannot be tribal. Right and wrong cannot be tribal. And that's part of the problem. And it gets to something that Tim Keller has written about in the past. The late theologian Tim Keller wrote a book, and the book was called The Reason for God. And Keller was actually quoting someone else in the book. And he was talking about the great Says Who. Who comes up with the idea? Who comes up with the idea of morality? Is it the tribe? If so, it's all reflective. It's Arthur Leff. This is what Arthur Leff wrote. When would it be impermissible to make the formal intellectual equivalent of what is known in bar rooms and schoolrooms as the grand says who? In the absence of God, each ethical and legal system will be differentiated by the answer it chooses to give to one key question: who among us ought to be able to declare law that ought to be obeyed? Stated that baldly, the question is so intellectually unsettling that one would expect to find a noticeable number of legal and ethical thinkers trying not to come to grips with it. Either God exists or does not. But if he does not, nothing and no one else can take his place. If there is no God, there is no way to say any one action is moral and another immoral, but only I like this. If that is the case, who gets the right to put their subjective, arbitrary moral feelings into law? You may say the majority has the right to make the law, but do you mean then that the majority has the right to vote to exterminate a minority? If you say no, that's wrong, then you're back to square one. Who says that the majority has a moral obligation not to kill the minority? Why should your moral convictions be obligatory for those in opposition? Why should your view prevail over the will of the majority? The fact is, says Leff, if there is no God, then all moral statements are arbitrary, all moral valuations are subjective and internal, and there is no external moral standard by which a person's feelings and values are judged. Yet Leff ends the intellectual essay on the great says you this way, quote, as things are now, everything is up for grabs. Nevertheless, napalming babies is bad. Starving the poor is wicked. Buying and selling each other is depraved. There is such a thing as evil altogether now. Says who? God help us. Nietzsche understood this, saying, the masses blink and say we are all equal. Man is but man. Before God, we are all equal. Before God, but now God has died. Raymond Gaeta is an atheist thinker. Let me read you what Raymond Gaeta wrote. Only someone who is religious can speak seriously of the sacred. We may say that all human beings are estimably precious, that they are ends in themselves, that they are owed unconditional respect, that they possess inalienable rights, and of course that they possess inalienable dignity. In my judgment, these are ways of trying to say what we feel a need to say when we are estranged from the conceptual resources of God, and we need to say it. Not one of these statements about human beings has the power of the religious way of speaking, that we are sacred because God loves us, his children. Arthur Leff is not simply concluding that there's no basis for human rights without God. He's also pointing out that despite the fact that we can't justify or ground human rights in a world without God, we still know they exist. If they exist, who gave them? And if some higher being gave them, we cannot cheer on an executive being murdered just because we think he did bad or just because we think he worked for a bad company. And yet many people on the left, many people without God, many people like this supposed shooter decided he could be the arbiter of who is a human and who is a parasite and gave him the power to exterminate the parasite. And the left has just condemned Donald Trump for saying things they believe mean he wants to eliminate immigrants as parasites, and yet they're willing to give this guy a pass because he targeted the right parasite. When we descend into society and tribally get to decide who is human and who is parasite, we ourselves open ourselves up to horror. It has happened time and time again, and to see the left doing it in this country is a dangerous warning sign for where we are headed as a country. We should all note that where they want us to go is a very terrible hell on earth. Now, all of this news was sort of breaking and everything else happening this weekend. I was in Salt Lake City, Utah for Americans for Prosperity. Actually spent a lot of time on stage talking about the collapse of Syria, as I did at the beginning of this program, talking about the economic path forward in this country and the leadership we can get from Donald Trump and the Republicans and the wildness of the left trying to make excuses for the murder of a human being in New York. It's all relevant to the show today. It was all on stage Saturday night, almost a preview for the show with Americans for Prosperity. They've got great teams in chapters across the country. I spoke to the Utah chapter. They were having their annual banquet. Every state has Americans for Prosperity. They'd love to have you on board. Go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer today. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. You can sign up with AFP, and you can be an activist in your state. You can learn to go to your local government or state government to advance common sense conservative reforms, or you can just be the most informed person in your circle of friends. In Utah, they were telling me they knocked on tens of thousands of doors in a special election in Utah, and they were able to win it with a pro-market, pro-freedom, pro-family conservative by just being the best trained activists on the ground. They are around the country. You can be a part of it. Americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Now, before I go to break, got to correct myself. Thank you to a listener who caught it. I mentioned earlier Obama beating Bush. Obviously, he didn't beat Bush. It was McCain. I just misspoke, but you all know what I meant. Thanks to the listener for pointing it out so I could correct myself before the show ended today. We'll be right back.
He'll do the research and give it to you straight. Erick Erickson is live every weekday.
So we have what appears to be the release of a manifesto by the just wild shooter. Includes numbers hold power, and these actions reflect this truth. Numerology weaves a mystical thread through the universe, and its application here reveals the deeper significance of the strike. Except it's not real. It's not real. Circulating, but that doesn't appear to be the actual manifesto. It certainly appears from the press reports the police have a manifesto, and it certainly appears that he's anti-capitalist, but people have just blown up this essential admission of guilt and targeting of the healthcare CEO, and they're circulating this manifesto online. But one, it clearly appears to have been a PDF of some kind that looks to be generated by Chat GPT or some such, and probably not actually real. You got to be careful. The story is flying fast. It does appear this guy is some sort of anti-woke progressive, if you will, tech guy. He is alleged to be the shooter, certainly person of interest now. But you got to be careful what you see online out there. A lot of people sent me this link, said, have you read this? Have you read this? Appears to be too good to be true at the moment. This guy's going to be, as a buddy of mine just said, a unique case study for all of us. How about this? How about instead of saying he's on the left or he's on the right, woke or not woke, Bernie bro or not, how about we just say if he's the murderer, he's bad? How about we say he's bad? But can we also say it's the people who broke into the University of Michigan Board of Regents member and wrote divest Palestine is also evil, bad? Can we say people are bad who do terrible things to people that we don't like? Can we say this is bad? Can we acknowledge real right and real wrong? Can we acknowledge something beyond tribalism these days? That's a problem we're headed, and the left is turning violent. We've got to be careful. I do wonder if the person who turned him into McDonald's, well, Donald Trump worked there a few weeks ago.